All right, Mr. Williams, you're going to look right here at me. Dr. Williams, I'm sorry. Let me get you to first just kind of give me your name, your age, and where you were born and where you live now. Just kind of introduce yourself.
Tell me when you want me to start.
I'm ready whenever you're ready.
Okay, well, I'm a local Wilmingtonian. Not very many of those left, but there are a few. I was born right here in Wilmington, North Carolina. My name is Bertram, B-E-R-T-R-A-M, Williams, Jr. As I said, I was born here in Wilmington, was raised here, went to school here. When I finished at New Hanover High School, I went to Chapel Hill and finished, got a BA degree there. Then went into medical school and got an MD degree at Vanderbilt University School of Medicine, and went into surgical training and completed surgical training, and eventually after the war came back here and practiced surgery for about 40 years here before I changed occupations.
So you went to medical school in you said in Vanderbilt, correct? Why did you decide to go to medical school after college?
Well, that's sort of a strange thing, and I don't know that I can answer that entirely accurately. But it was during my first year in college that I decided that's what I wanted to do. And so my rest of my education as far as getting an AB degree was related to preparing myself to go into medical school. It was not easy to get into medical school. It's kind of hard to do that. So you've got to have the right kind of grades, and they evaluate you, and somebody has to make an opinion on you. So you've got to prepare yourself for all of that. I did go to 2 years of medical school at Chapel Hill, and then transferred to Vanderbilt University School of Medicine. And I enjoyed it out there. That's in Nashville, Tennessee. That's where the Grand Ole Opry is, and so that was kind of interesting. And I think I made a good decision at that time.
Good. So you went to medical school. What was your focus on medical school, and what did you? I'm kind of jumping ahead of the war and all that, but what? You were a doctor for 40 years. Were you a surgeon? Were you a family doctor? Just kind of talk to those who may not know you.
Well, medicine has something for everybody. No matter what your personality is, they have a job that will fit into it. And I was interested in surgery, so I went into general surgery, which included at that time vascular surgery, and ended up doing a lot of vascular surgery.
Okay, great.
But it takes a while, to get the proper training for that. And my initial period was before I went into the Navy during the war, and then after the war was over, I came back to Vanderbilt Hospital and finished the residency there at 4 years. Because medical school is 4 years, and getting trained and getting what we call a certification by the boards of surgery takes another 5 years. So after college, that's 9 years of training before you can go into practice.
So you did vascular surgery. Can you tell me anything about these veins all in my leg? No. So what year did you graduate from medical school? I think you were telling me, was it 1940?
Well, I graduated from Chapel Hill in 1940. I went right into medical school. And the war started in 1941. So instead of the students in college and other graduate schools like I was in, instead of them going for 9 months and having 3 months vacation in the summertime, you went year round. So you really got a full year and at least another quarter of the next year. So I finished medical school in December of 1943. And I went in then for an internship at Vanderbilt Hospital. Was there for 9 months, and then was activated in the Navy.
Okay, going back to, so you did 9 months of internship at Vanderbilt. So did you get drafted into the war, or was?
No, I volunteered to go in earlier, and I was in medical school at the time, and they placed me in what they call a V-12 program, which was deferring you until you finished and got your MD degree and 9 months internship. And as soon as I got that, I got orders. I'm surprised they kept such good records, but I immediately got orders to go into active duty. I was in Nashville, Tennessee at the time, and so they sent me to the Naval Hospital at Memphis. I stayed there about 2 weeks, and then got orders to go to Camp Pendleton in Oceanside, California, where the Marine Corps Western base was located. And I did all my duty during the war with the 2nd Marine Division. I stayed there for just a short time and then got on a ship and went to Pearl Harbor. And I had always wondered where Pearl Harbor got its name, and I saw it. The water was all pearl colored out there, and I was really surprised. Stayed there for a little while until they made up a convoy, and then zigzagged across the Pacific during the Mariana Campaign. And the Mariana Campaign, involved islands like Wake and Tinian and Saipan, and joined the 2nd Marine Division on the island of Saipan. And stayed there until Okinawa started, and then our division went to Okinawa and did a feint landing procedure off the end of Okinawa in a different area that the main landing occurred. And that day was called Love Day. It was on an Easter morning. I remember that, on a Sunday. I went back to Saipan then and watched the B-29s come in and out of Saipan, of Tinian. Tinian was just a little short distance, just a water strait between the two. And it was loaded with B-29s, and a very active area. And when the war was over, the truce was signed, the 2nd Marine Division was assigned the island of Kyushu, which is one of the islands of mainland Japan. And we went in there for occupation of that. And the interesting thing there is that we landed in Nagasaki, which is where the atomic bomb hit. So I got to see all the results of that atomic bomb. And the significant thing about that is there wasn't anything left. The atomic bomb had destroyed everything. All the buildings were gone except a group down on the waterfront. That's a seaport town. On the waterfront, they were made out of metal, and they were just all melted in one little pile. I was so surprised too that there was no hole in the ground. We were accustomed to shells from the ships and shells from the airplanes and artillery and that sort of thing making big holes, but there were no holes in Nagasaki. And when I thought about that a little bit, I realized why, because the bomb went off in the air and it destroyed everything as a result of that. Then I stayed there until I was eligible for discharge from the Navy. I did no Navy duty while I was there. It was all Marine duty during the war, and came back and was discharged.
So you say you volunteered, so you'd gone through medical school, and it could have been just really easy for you to keep going that route of going to medical school and then start practicing. Why did you decide to join the Marines, and why did you decide?
Well, I was already in medical school at the time, and that was in 1941, so I was in my 2nd year of medical school then. And it was the Navy decision, not mine. They decided they needed me more as an MD than they did as just another member of the Navy. And I was aware of the V-12 program, and I realized that's what they would do when I applied. So, and I did. And the amazing thing to me is how they kept records of all the people they had. I knew exactly when I finished my internship and was ready to go in, because I got a stack of orders just about the same time.
Is that right? So what were your feelings, getting deployed out to Camp Pendleton? What if you can remember, like, what was going through your mind as far as you knew how bad the Japanese were, and obviously you weren't going over there where the Germans and where everything was going on in Europe. You were going over to the West Coast. What were your feelings?
Well, of course, at that time I didn't know a lot of that stuff, because I was just a regular civilian and college and graduate school student. So I didn't understand all of that. Like, looking back on it now, you understand that the whole idea of fighting to the Japanese was different than the fighting with us. They had signed on to the Geneva Conference. but they didn't comply with any of the agreements at the time. Of course, I didn't know anything about that at the time, but we didn't really have much training in Camp Pendleton. I was only there for about 2 weeks, but you really didn't need a lot of training because the training you'd already gotten in medical school, or at least what they were interested in.
So you were sent off just to be a medical doctor. You weren't going into combat and actually fight, were you? Or were you?
Well, I realized at the beginning that I was more interested in surgery than I was in any other field, and so I had my direction already established after my first year in medical school. I was planning on going into general surgery, which I eventually did.
But I mean, like when you got your orders to go over to Japan and all that, you were strictly going to be a doctor, or were you going to actually go thinking you may go into combat and fight?
Well, I was going as a doctor.
Okay.
So my actual name I was called was battalion surgeon, and I was right down with the troops.
Okay. So you trained at Camp Pendleton, and you touched on a little bit, you went over to Pearl Harbor. How long after Pearl Harbor had been bombed did you go over there? Was it a couple years?
Well, let's see, I finished medical. Yes, it was about halfway through the war.
Okay.
But at Pearl Harbor, of course, the battleships and Battleship Row were all there. Nothing had been done. I think the Arizona now is the one that they're really developing as kind of a museum type thing. They were all in the water, and I could see all of those. Pearl Harbor was a very busy place at that time, and the ship that we were going to make our trip over to Saipan was one that I was on in the harbor, and for most of the time that I was in Hawaii, I had to stay aboard ship. They didn't let me go ashore. Well, on Christmas Day, they did let me go ashore. And so I had a little time in Honolulu there. But after a day or two, then we got out on our way to Saipan.
So I know it was a couple years after Pearl Harbor had been bombed, and that was really unexpected. But if you remember, what was the morale like around Pearl Harbor, around that area when you went?
Well, of course, I didn't get to mix with the civilians in that area, but I have not been back to that area since that time. But when we were there, at that time, there were no real tall buildings in the area. They were all just, I guess, 2 and 3 stories, but nothing any higher than that. And we just walked around that area until it was time to get back aboard ship. We only had a few hours, so I really didn't get to see a lot. I did go by some of the hotels that were there that you've heard about, like the Royal Hawaiian Hotel, and I wanted to see Waikiki Beach because I was accustomed to having our nice beaches here in Riceville Beach and Carolina Beach and the ones in this area. And I got out there and I found the beach at Waikiki was only about 10 feet wide. And it was nothing compared to ours. Our beaches were much better than Waikiki. And the waves occurred in the water well away from the land, so it was entirely different from ours here, and I thought how fortunate we were to have what we have. But it was interesting.
So when you were there at Pearl Harbor before y'all left to go over to Japan, like, were you sad, like, knowing that so many Americans had lost their lives there just a couple years before that? Or?
Well, the general attitude of the American troops was optimistic, and I didn't see any depression or anybody fighting at the time and unsettled about what they were going to do. Everybody seemed to just take it as a matter of going to work in the morning, and that's what they did.
Okay, talk about being deployed from Pearl Harbor to go over to Japan. At that time, so how long, you said it was about a month after the atomic bomb, so had the Japanese surrendered when you guys were?
Yes. Okay. The Japanese surrendered not too long after the bomb at Nagasaki. The first one was at Hiroshima, and the second one's at Nagasaki. And it was a short period after that that the emperor decided to surrender. And I guess all the ceremony was done up in area of Tokyo, which was on Honshu Island. I did not go to Honshu during that time. I have been back to Honshu as a visit since the war, but we were assigned to Kyushu, as I said. And that's where I stayed the whole time that we were in the occupation of Japan. Our responsibility was to go over the whole island and get anything we could find that they could use to make war with, and it was carried down to the water and put on a barge and carried out in the Pacific and dumped. And then that was the main chore that we did at the time. We met no resistance at all in Japan. Matter of fact, when we landed, there wasn't anybody there. The Japanese had been subject to so much propaganda about the Marines being animals, and they would kill you and at the drop of a hat and that sort of thing. And there isn't any more disciplined group of people in the world than the Marines are. They are really follow orders and are a very disciplined group. So we had no trouble at all. And pretty soon the Japanese realized that, and they started coming back into the area. They had sent all the young girls off into the mountains because they knew they were all going to be attacked by Marines. And of course, none of that happened. And they found out what was going to happen, so they all came back. And with very few exceptions, they were all friendly, had no problem with them. And of course, we had not much to do there at night, and we had a place that the officers used, and so we'd get together there and play poker every night.
So you said 2 atomic bombs were dropped, and you guys went to Kawasaki, is that right? Or Hiroshima. The atomic bombs, there were 2 that were dropped in Japan?
Yeah, one was at Hiroshima and the other was Nagasaki.
Nagasaki, so you
and we landed through Nagasaki.
Okay.
So as I went in, I knew where we were going and what we were going to do. And Nagasaki is a little indentation of the ocean, really. There are a lot of those in Japan that's mountainous on one side and flat on the other. And Nagasaki was on the flat side. And I stood on the deck so I could see everything as I went in and got to look over the whole area.
What were your feelings knowing that an atomic bomb had just been dropped there about a month before? What were you thinking? I
didn't think anything about the danger of going in there, and apparently the danger had already passed because I'm not aware that anybody had any ill effects from it. But I was more interested in sightseeing than I was in the actual dropping of the bomb, seeing what the bomb had done, and that was what surprised me. The lack of any disturbance on the ground. It was all just as flat as it was normally.
Well, you told me a really interesting story a couple weeks back about you guys coming in on ships or about Japanese soldiers. Were they making their Japan residents, or was it Americans living in Japan jump off a cliff like they were threatening them with the gun? Can you kind of tell that story?
You're talking about something that happened on Saipan.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, that was after the campaign of Saipan.
Okay.
It was at the end of it, before of course the Japanese didn't surrender. You know, they would commit murder or commit suicide. And that's what they did on Saipan. The last group of them made a banzai charge and just got mowed down, except for a bunch that stayed at the end of the island. It's a beautiful area. It's a big rocky cliff about 200 feet down from the land down to the water. And there were rocks down in the water, and the ocean was breaking on the rocks and running back and then breaking again. And for anyone left in that area, any Japanese left on there, the officers made them commit suicide by jumping over. And even the civilians, I have read since that before the island was attacked, there was something like 20,000 civilians on there. I didn't see that many. There was just a handful of them that I saw. But there were a few that surrendered, the civilians, not soldiers. And those people were taken care of. And the Marines got some of those people with loud microphones that spoke their language and out loud so the people on the edge of the cliff up there could hear it. Give yourself up. They'll take care of you. You'll be fed. You'll be taken care of. They won't harm you. Give yourself up. None of them did. And even the civilians that were in that area, the Japanese officers, made them jump too. And I didn't see this, but I've read since then that one of the civilians had 3 children. He threw one at a time off the cliff and killed, and then he jumped himself. So there were none of them living when the Marines got to the cliff. All of them were gone. But the water was filled with bodies, and the bodies floated around the island as long as I was on the island. And of course they got real bloated, so they would float rather than sink. And
so what, did y'all have to clean up the bodies? Did y'all pull them out of the water?
Well, they eventually washed away.
Oh, okay. So
and of course they'll float for a while, but eventually even the body will sink.
Yeah.
And I guess the fish helped get rid of them too.
Did you become numb to seeing that, or how did that make you feel seeing that?
No, it was kind of like sightseeing too. I mean, you had no sympathy for the Japanese after the way they did.
Yeah.
The civilians, though, were very cordial. And I think I told you about going fishing with a group of civilians. Being raised here in New Hanover County, I was interested in fishing. And the only protein those civilians had was fish. And so the Marines got them a nice fishing boat, and they went out usually every day. And I got permission to go with them one day and went out into the Mariana area, which is the deepest ocean in the world, and watched them fish all day. And that was really interesting. They were professional fishermen. They really knew how to do it. They would catch minnows. We went down to Tinian, off the end of Tinian, and got some minnows in a net and put them in a container in the boat so they would stay alive. And we got into a big school of bonito mackerel, a huge school of bonito mackerel. The people would stand up around the side of the boat. And I guess there were about 20 of them because they were side to side around the full circumference of the boat. And they had a spray that came out of the side of the boat and sprayed water between the fishermen and the ocean. So the fish couldn't see them well from above. And they put the handful of minnows in their mouth. All the hooks did not have a barb. The hooks were free of barb. And they would get a minnow in the tongue curled up and could take that hook and with just one wipe, hook it in that fish and throw it overboard. And that's all it took, just like that. And pretty soon they had 1.5 tons of fish.
So when you went to Nagasaki and you said there was nothing there. So what did you guys do when you first got there, the area with the atomic bomb?
Well, when we first got there, we didn't know what kind of reception we were going to get, so we were prepared to defend ourselves if necessary. But we landed there just like you would on making an attack on an island. You went down a rope ladder on the side of the boat and got into a landing craft and went ashore that way. So we were prepared to do whatever was necessary, but didn't see nobody there. We didn't know what would happen during the night, though this was in the afternoon. So we decided to bivouac right there in the city limits. The streets were not paved, they were all dirt, so we just would lie down in the street there on the dirt. That's where we were planning on spending the first night. Of course, we had people up around, Marines that were assigned to walk around, but nothing happened during the night, nor did they ever give any resistance at all the whole time we were there. But the next day we started moving out then. I moved out of Nagasaki into the town we got into with Miyakanojo, which is on the island, but it had not been destroyed, and so there were some barracks there that we moved into, and we built some other things there too for ourselves, like Quonset huts and that sort of thing. And that's where we stayed. And there were still Marines there when I left, almost 7, 8, 9 months later.
So you stayed there 7, 8
for about that long, yeah.
months?
Stayed there until I was eligible for discharge.
I know you only spent a short time at Nagasaki, but like, did they have, buildings and houses, was all that just destroyed to nothing, or
You mean in that area in Japan?
in Nagasaki when you first got there where the bomb was dropped?
Well, there wasn't anything in Nagasaki because it had all been destroyed by the bomb. I think the thing that did so much damage, in addition to the concussion, was the heat. I think what happened to those buildings, those metal buildings, they were all so twisted just in a pile. They weren't blown away like you would expect if you had an explosion in the center. They would just crumble down in one spot, and that was all twisted. These big I-beams were twisted, and all that was as a result of heat.
Yeah. And again, I know you didn't go over to Europe or anything, but what were obviously he was a bad person, but what were your thoughts on Hitler and what he did to the world during that time period?
Well, the Marines, had a job to do, and that's what they had on their mind. They didn't think the big picture as much as they thought about what was in their job. And it reminds me of something that somebody in the lower echelons complained to somebody who was running the war, and they said, "You fight the battle, we'll fight the war." And so that was the general attitude. We were down in the mud where the mud was flowing, and that was it. Another thing that I didn't have mentioned today, but I did say something to you the other day about it. When we were off Okinawa, and it was on Love Day, it was right after daybreak, just beginning to see. All of our division was down off the coast, and we got into landing craft like we were going to land in that area, trying to blow the Japanese troops to us away from the place where the landing really occurred. As it turned out, the Japanese did not defend the island at the landing at all, like they had at other islands. But the order was out that all the airplanes were friendly, and as we were going in our position, I saw how the aircraft carriers did. There were about 10 of 12 aircraft carriers making a circle, a huge circle, but they were all in the circle, and surrounding them were all these defensive boats and all. So the flyers that went off on those aircraft carriers had to recognize their carrier and be sure they landed on the right one, because they had a big shore so to do it. But the word was out that all the aircraft were going to be friendly. But just about daybreak, a bunch of airplanes started coming from the island, and they were just above the water, so the background of the island was dark, and they were dark, and so they were hard to see, but they were coming straight for the ships. And fortunately, a lot of these kids, they were only 19, 20, and 21, 18 years old, they're just kids, were behind these big guns, 20 millimeter guns on the ships. And I knew a lot of them. I talked to one, and he said those planes were all friendly, but I knew that one wasn't friendly, so I started shooting. And so they did. They started shooting, and they shot a lot of them down before they came in. But one did get to our boat and hit our boat at the waterline.
So those were Japanese?
Japanese plane.
Okay.
And what they wanted to do was hit the controls, so they got the officers and got the ship. If they couldn't hit the controls, the superstructure, then they wanted to hit the waterline so they could put the ship out of business. They hit ours at the waterline.
So at that point, Japan had already
That's
surrendered.
kamikazes,
Oh, okay. So they were just some rogue.
They were trained, and that's what they knew they were going to do, kill themselves.
Yeah. Wow.
There was a spirit war for Japan, and that's why some officers would cut the heads off of their fellow Japanese, and then they would kill themselves. None of them wanted to surrender.
So did you see these planes coming in?
Yeah, well, you didn't see them long because they're coming in so fast. Yes, I saw them.
Did you take cover?
Did I what?
Did you take cover when you saw them? What did you do?
Well, it was so quick, I didn't have time to do much. I was on deck at the time the plane came in. But it went inside the plane and went into the engine room and knocked the engine out, so we were dead in the water.
Okay.
We were transferred then to other ships. There were lots of ships up there. The water was full of ships. You've never seen so many. The U.S. had tremendous power out there at that time. and just overwhelming. I don't know. In Europe, they were all surrendered, but the Japanese didn't do that.
Yeah. So y'all, even after Japan had surrendered, there were still kamikaze planes coming to try to attack some of the...
No, when Japanese surrendered, I mean, everybody followed orders from the emperor, and that was the end of the war. As far as I know, and there may have been some fighting somewhere on some of the islands in the Philippines that didn't get the word.
Yeah.
But anybody that got the word under the Japanese followed the orders of the emperor, as far as I could see.
Okay.
We had no resistance at all when we went into Japan. But this was during, the kamikazes came in, during the Okinawa campaign, and on the first day of landing on Okinawa. And that was a tough fight there on the land. The Army and the Marines both were involved in that.
Yeah. So you stayed, is there any other stories that you can remember that are interesting during that time period, your time in Pearl Harbor, your time over in Japan, anything that stands out?
Well, the three things that I thought were interesting, and I've already told you about them, was one, the Nagasaki, and the other was the kamikaze planes, and the other was the situation on Saipan at the cliff, where everybody was forced to jump in and kill themselves.
So it was really the last 7-8 months you were there, it was a peaceful mission for you, correct? You guys were just trying to restore life back for Japanese residents, or what was your mission there the last 7-8 months you were there?
You mean in Japan?
Yes, sir.
Well, the main mission was to get anything that they could fight with,
Okay.
and put on the bars and take it out, which we did every day. We had a group that got up and went all over the whole island. But they didn't find much, really. Japan was really in bad shape at that time. And I have never seen anything or read anything about the mechanics that went on between the emperor and Tojo and the war group, because they wanted to continue to fight. They were arming all the civilians, and that would have been a tremendous loss of life unnecessarily. And fortunately, the emperor changed all that. And I have never read anything or found any information about really how he did it and the manner in which it occurred and that sort of thing. I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah. So when did you leave Japan? Do you remember? Was it the end of 1945? Was it 46?
It was in 45.
Okay.
It was about the middle of sometime June or July in 45.
So what happened then? Did you just come
Well, when I
back?
came on back here, I was stationed at the Navy units for a while until everything was lined up so I could be discharged. And I was discharged. And after that, I went back then to Nashville, Tennessee, because I wanted to continue my training. And you weren't paid anything during that period, and I heard that if I would join the active reserve in the local Marine unit there, that you get $20 a meeting, which was a lot of money at that time. So I joined, and then Korea came along, so I was going to be activated again.
Yeah.
And by that time, I had finished my residency and ready to take all the examinations that you had to take to get to what we call the boards of surgery. And I was married and had 2 children, and my wife was really concerned about it. We didn't have any money, but we did pile up enough that I could buy an airplane ticket to Washington. And when I got there, I went to the Bureau of Surgery, Medicine and Surgery in the Navy Department. And I had a Navy uniform on because I had already been activated. And I was sent back to a detail officer, and I found out then that for every doctor, at least in the Navy, that he was assigned to somebody else that took care of him and followed along and knew what he was doing and supposed to be following. So the detail officer that was in charge of me, I explained my situation. He said, "Well, we need you more at the Naval Hospital than we need you out on the line like you did back during the war." And so I was pulled out of that active reserve and sent to the U.S. Naval Hospital in, they say Memphis, but actually it was in Wilmington, Tennessee, just about 20 miles north of Memphis. And I stayed there for a year until the discharge, and that's when I came back to Wilmington.
Okay.
So I was in the service twice.
Okay. So you came back to Wilmington. Did you have a hard time adjusting? I mean, I know you did some stuff in between the war and coming back to Wilmington, but was it hard for you adjusting back to civilian life after seeing?
Oh no, it was not difficult for me. I did that without any difficulty. I decided I wanted to go into practice here in Wilmington, and I didn't have any special connections with the medical group here in Wilmington, so I had to start from scratch. And it was very difficult at that time Wilmington was about 32, 33, 34,000 people. And it wasn't long after I got here the coastline left, and the coastline was the biggest employer. And it was very difficult to get started in solo, because most of the doctors then were in solo practice. There were 2 or 3 that maybe had 2 people in them, but no big group like we have now. And so it was very difficult to get started.
So you started your own practice then?
I started my own surgical practice as a solo practice. My office was on 3rd Street, in the building where the bank building is at 3rd and Grace now.
Okay, I know what you're talking about.
And I stayed there until we built the building out in front of the hospital on Medical Center Drive.
Okay. All right, so yeah, I mean, do you have, I mean, just some general questions, like, do you have any regrets in life? Is there anything you wish you could change, you know?
I can hardly hear you. We'll talk a little louder.
That's a pretty open-ended question, I know. But what about the war and you know, your medical career? Is there anything you wish you could change, or I mean, I know you can't, but do you have any regrets with either one of those, or are you pretty happy with the way your life has gone? I'm just asking you some general questions.
Well, I was satisfied with the course that I had taken in the past. I went in the right direction and did complete training, the best training I could get to do what I wanted to do. And that part was fine, but I did have a family and I had to make a living, and that was very difficult for me to get started with because of the situation in Wilmington. An entirely different situation now. We have people in large groups, so they're making a living wage when they come in. That wasn't true back then.
Sign keeps changing on us. So you ended up obviously doing pretty well for yourself. Medically, I've heard nothing but good stories about you and doctor. What made you decide to buy the farm out here after?
Well, I was, after I got started and got to going good in my profession, I was a 12 to 14 hour a day job. I got up at about 5 o'clock every morning. I got to the hospital about between 6 and 6:30, made rounds and did surgery all morning and up until the early afternoon, went to the office. And I didn't leave the office usually till about 9 o'clock, went back, made rounds. So I had a real busy day. And I was doing that for 15, 20 years, and I said, well, what am I going to do when I can't do this anymore? I'm so used to all this activity, I better figure out something that I can do when I get through. And I like the outdoors and like to grow things, and decided that I'd like to find a piece of land if I could. And so I started looking around, and I found the piece that we're on right now. And of course, I've enlarged it a little bit since then, but that was a good decision, because when I stopped practicing, people asked me when I retired. I said I didn't retire, I just changed occupation. So if you ask me what my occupation is, I say if I'm a full-time farmer. And so that's what I was, any blank I fill out and it says occupation, it's farmer.
So when you first retired from the medical field, did you miss it a lot, or was it a tough transition?
When you do the kind of work that I did, you get to see a lot of real nice people. And I enjoyed seeing all those people, and They were loyal to me, and I was appreciative of that. And I miss seeing those people. There's so much going on for a surgeon like I was, like operating all night at night and going right back to a full day the next day. One time I was up for 3 straight days, 3 days and nights with no sleep. And that's pretty hard to do. It was rare for me to ever sleep through a night without a phone call. It would be very unusual for me to go a whole night without getting at least one call during the night. And so that's a different kind of life. Practicing medicine like that is a way of life, it's not a job. And you have to look at it that way, otherwise you're not happy with it. And that sort of thing, you know, at my age I could begin enjoying a full night's sleep and that sort of thing. And so that made up for the missing of all those nice people that I dealt with. But I see a lot of those nice people still, and I enjoy it, and I remember what I did to most of them. I can't remember all the names, but I can remember what trouble they had and what I did.
Yeah. Did that take a toll on your family, that type of lifestyle with the...
A wife of now the doctrine of business science is entirely different. You're in groups now, so you share your work at night and your own call at night, so you don't get all the activity like we did in the initial stages. So it's entirely different now. But back when I was practicing, a wife had a hard job. She had to do everything by herself. I went for a year or so, and my children hardly recognized me. They saw me, they cried and ran back to their mama. And so they have a difficult job to do. I have to compare that with a minister's wife. I think they have a difficult job also. But my wife stood by me, and everything worked out all right. She raised the children. I have to give her all credit for that.
How long were you married for?
How long was I married?
Yes.
60 years.
Okay. Well, speaking of that, do you I don't, and you know, you don't have to talk about it if you want, but what are like your thoughts on God, and what are your thoughts on, you know, heaven and
Well, I have a scientific mind, but I haven't found enough. And I don't have the answer to all the problems that nobody else has the answer to. But I'm marveled by nature, and the more I learn about it, the more I understand how complicated it is, what a wonderful chemistry factor the body is, because everything in the body goes on by chemistry. And we're beginning to get down into some of those fundamental things like studying genes and the DNA and getting all those basic things done. And it's extremely interesting to me how the scientific aspect of it is working out. I'm a Christian. I think the Christian religion has done more good than any other religion. And in general, religion has done a lot more harm in the world than it has been good. Think about all these people that got killed in the name of somebody. Yeah. And but Christianity doesn't do that. So I think that's, I am a Christian. And I'm a member of the local First Baptist Church, and have been a member of the diaconate and that sort of thing.
Yeah. So are you scared of dying, or have you...
Oh, I'm not afraid of dying, no. Matter of fact, most of the males in my family have dropped dead, and I hope that's the way I go. It's pretty hard on the family, but on the star of the show, it's the best way to go.
Yeah.
Well, no, I'm not the least bit concerned about that. I've had a long life. I'm 94 years old, and who in the world can? Not many people can talk about that. So I've been extremely fortunate. And I've told the people when I go, I want them to have a happy occasion, have what a good time he did living all those years and everything being so successful and being so fortunate of the advantages that he had. That no sir, I've had a wonderful time in this life, and when my time comes, well, I'll wave goodbye with a smile on my face.
Well, that's good. Do you read on the Bible, or do you read on the like New Testament and the Gospels and all that, or?
Well, I put a lot of importance on ethics. I think ethics and the quality of living is very, very important. And of course, it all goes back to the Christian religion, like the Ten Commandments. And most of the religion, has to do with relationships. And of course, the practice of medicine is relationships. So there's a lot of similarity. And of course, you make the oath, do no harm, and preserve life, and all that sort of thing. And that's what I've done. And I'm a Rotarian and believe in the four-way test. Do what is beneficial to both parties. And that's the way I've tried to live my life. I don't say that I'm certainly not perfect, I realize that, but I've done the best that I could under the circumstances.
Yeah.
And I believe in supporting charities.
Yeah, that's important too.
And do support them.
I don't do enough of it. I don't volunteer enough. I need to do more. Was there anything else that stands out, like, from the war to medicine to family to the farm? Is there anything else that what do you want people to say about you when you're gone, and how do you want to be remembered?
Well, I don't know that it's going to make much difference to me about how they remember me, but I'm not concerned about that like I am about doing what is right at the present time. What happens after I'm gone, I tell them I don't give a hoot what happens to me after I'm gone. Do whatever they want to. But I am interested in what goes on while I have control of what I do. Very interested in it. I've told young people so often that how important honesty is. There's no substitute for honesty. People will understand a mistake, but will not understand dishonesty, and that's a good thing to remember. And the young people are receptive to things like that, but you have to sort of present it to them in the right way. Otherwise, they're resentful.
Yeah, no, that's very wise advice. If there's one thing in your life you could change, that you can think of, what would be something you could go back and do different?
Well, of course, probably as important as anything that you do is raising your family. I always looked at a family like a factory. If you've got a factory out there and you go in, you're going to try to evaluate that factory, you look at what they make and see what quality those things are. And I've always kind of looked at the family the same way. Their product is children. And their main job in the family is to properly raise the children and prepare them to live. And that's very similar to evaluating a factory.
Yeah. Okay. Is there anything else you can think? I mean, I know we could sit here and talk for hours and hours on end, but.
Well, my life hasn't been that important. I've done a lot of things, but after all, I've been just one person. I don't like to talk about my activities during the service because it sounds like I won the war by myself. Yeah. And they could have won the war without me very easily. Matter of fact, I did very little to help win the war.
Did you win any medals or anything? Were honorable?
Only engagement medals. I wasn't wounded, as far as I know. I never was in a Japanese man's sights on his gun. I don't think I was ever shot at.
And obviously living in '94, I don't think you were exposed to any of that atomic bomb, the residuals of atomic bomb.
I have never seen a study performed on our group of men that went in there at that time. But I'm not aware of any effects of that radioactive material. Some of it had to be there, but not much, because they checked it and they really couldn't find much. And I'm not aware of any study being done with that group of people. It'd be really interesting to take that group that landed in there right early like that and do a follow-up on them and see what happened to them during their life. Did they get special diseases and lymphomas and that sort of thing are related to that kind of radiation, and see how many of them had things of that nature. That'd be a nice study, but nobody's done it that I know of.
I'm sure something's been done on You said for a long time you had a hard time even thinking about buying a Japanese-made car. Just kind of.
Yes, when I came back, of course, I had been associated with all the Marines and all the activities they'd done, and the Japanese resistance, and the attitude of the Japanese. And the average person in the United States has no idea about the Japanese philosophy. You got to read some books down and find out how they were. Tojo advised them to kill no prisoner was to be left alive at any time. They were all to be killed, and most of them were. Not all of them, but most of them were. And so when I came back, I had the attitude that we got all these other options like General Motors and Ford and that sort of thing, and I'm never going to buy anything that was made in Japan. And I didn't. I went along for a good while. I'm not an emotional person, so I didn't get emotional about it. It was just something that I thought was the right thing to do. And eventually, maybe 15 years or so later, we had a young Japanese doctor that came to the hospital to get his training. And I got to know him real well. He was a nice fella. And I quizzed him about the war. Well, he knew absolutely nothing about the war. They don't teach it in school over there. They don't know anything about it. And I said, hey, I know a lot about this war that he doesn't know. He doesn't know anything about it. And he's not to blame for any of that. So my attitude changed then, and I felt different. I've been back and visited Japan on 2 occasions. And those people are very friendly over there. They're nice. We don't see any problem of anti-Americanism, or a whole lot better relationship between Japan and the United States and a lot of these other countries out there.
Yeah, I know, and I think just from talking with you, I mean, obviously you always hear World War II, you hear about Hitler, but I mean, it seems like the guy that was in charge of Japan, it seems like Japan was just as evil as Germany was at that point. What are your thoughts on?
Well, Japan, the Japanese person is, in those days, thinking was entirely different. The first thing was the emperor. He was God to them. They worshipped him. Everything they did was involved with him. And they called it a spirit war because they were Japanese and they had the God of their home, and they couldn't lose. They had to win. And even all through the school systems, it was the military. Even the girls, they wore uniforms and they were trained in things of a military nature. So it was an entirely different country at that time. And the one that was in control was Tojo, and he was in the army, and and others like him were responsible for all of that. And he was convicted, after the war and sentenced to death. But he tried to commit harikiri, failed in it. He survived it. They took him back to the hospital and got him well, and then hung him.
So he really brainwashed all those people.
Well, he wanted to continue the battle. He wanted to fight in Japan. And he was arming all the civilians there. And that would have been a terrible situation. Japanese that would have died would have been awful.
Yeah.
But he was prepared to, everybody, Japanese be wiped away.
Yeah, they were doing some awful things over there, attacking China, and there was some massacre they did over in some town in China.
The rape of Nanking, that was terrible, just awful. And that was the whole attitude everywhere they went was that way. And of course, their general attitude and reason for that was that all the European countries had done their imperialism all through the Pacific, and the Japanese didn't do any of that. Now they were the strong man in the Pacific, and they were just late at it, but they had to go ahead and catch up with imperialism. And so that's the excuse they gave for starting the war like that.
When I know you said that you guys' main mission over there was to try to get any weapons and stuff away, but was it also to try to re-educate the Japanese people? And
not while I was there. Okay. Not while I was there. Of course, what happened that had not happened in other wars, instead of the loser of the war being persecuted, we had the Marshall Plan. And so we went in and tried to help rehabilitate people who had been killing us, which was an amazing philosophy, but it turned out to be the right philosophy and the right attitude to take, and it worked out real well. So they were helped. And the Japanese attitude now towards the American is very respectful, and it's very nice. And the whole attitude over there has changed. When I went in to Nagasaki and the civilians started coming back in, they all were wearing kimonos. That was the natural clothing of the time, and they wore their little shoes with the hook between your big toe and your next toe. That's what they wore for foot covering. But now all that's changed. You go over there now, and the Japanese girls have got the same kind of makeup, wear the same kind of clothing. Maybe the colors are not quite as bright, but they've all been westernized. There's nothing of that old thing that you see on the streets like you used to.
So what are your thoughts on just military personnel in general, all those who've given their lives over the years, whether it be Marine, Army, Navy, Air Force, in World War I, World War II, Vietnam, even the Iraq, Afghanistan wars recently. What is your attitude towards our soldiers and our military?
Well, it'll vary depending on the area. We've got having all that trouble in the Middle East now, and what comes to my mind is what would happen if we just stayed out of it. For centuries, they've been fighting themselves. And that attitude is not going to change. That's in the DNA. That's the way they don't settle a problem by rules of law. They want to fight about it, and they've been doing that each other. And we go in there, so it gives them a common enemy, then they all can stand up against us. But I don't see that we're making much progress over there at the present time, unless we keep our troops over there and force them to do it. If you leave things to them, let them make the decision, they revert back to their old style of the way they handle problems.
Yeah.
So I think that turned out to be a mistake. I was supportive of going into Al Qaeda and trying to get rid of them, but I think looking back on it, that was a mistake. We should have stayed out of it.
Yeah, you're right about wars. I mean, even Jesus said it out of his own mouth. He said there will always be wars on this earth and stuff. So I mean, that's true, and it's like you just want to have peace, but it just seems like there never is peace on this earth.
You do all you can for those people, but it doesn't sink in. It just doesn't. If they're not willing, they don't have a strong enough force to willing to have a rule of law. That's what they've got to do, and they fight each other. I mean, look over there now about the Sunnis and all fighting each other, and that's not going to change. That's an emotional problem, and the two emotional problems, religion and politics, is hard to handle. There's not a lot of reason to them.
I know. What would be your message like to all military people, those who have given their lives, those who are still alive, and what would you say to our military personnel if you could address them?
You mean with a problem occurring in the world somewhere?
No, just kind of a giving thanks for people giving their service. Our troops giving service throughout the years, giving their lives. You know what I'm saying? Does that make sense?
Well, what you're saying is you're talking about the United States becoming the police force of the world, and you got to correct your thinking and sort of think bigger than those of us that walk around. I don't know that I've got all my thinking big enough. I always thought of myself as walking around down here and wonder if I was doing the right thing. I sort of picture myself like an eagle up in the air and looking down from the top and seeing how things are going on, trying to see the big picture. And so it's hard to see the big picture at our level as far as the world is concerned. But it does make sense that there has to be a police force most everywhere. We have a police force in Wilmington, we have it all over the United States. And who's going to police the world? Because you're going to have criminals in the world just like you got criminals in our country. And you have to think about that a little bit. And perhaps if you go into depth with your thinking like that, it does make some sense that we who are the best equipped to do that sort of thing sort of have to do our part. It turns out that our part is equal to everybody else's combined. We're the ones that really have to do it and been doing it. And if you think about it from the big picture, it may make some sense, but it's hard to think about it when you see the bad things going on at the level in which we're operating, down here at the roots and in the mud.
what I was saying was, like, if you could give a message to like our troops, like just kind of thanking them for their service, including yourself. You see what I'm saying? Like, I'm something to the effect of, I'm thankful I was a Marine and helped to try to restore peace, and all those who've given their lives over the years. I'm thankful for them for helping protect our country.
Well, my general attitude along that line is that we should be very respectful for those people, and those people in the service now are volunteers. They're not conscripted. But when you look at the big picture and you go back to in all of history, people have made sacrifices for what they believed in, like in this country, in the Revolutionary War, and each generation has to do his part. So our generation is not doing any bigger part, in my opinion, as an individual, as it did back in the Revolutionary War and back during the other periods of distress in the World War I. So I think essentially what we're doing at the generation in which we live is we're doing our share of protecting our way of living, and I don't think we deserve any more credit than we give the people back in the Revolutionary War. I think we're doing our duty just like they did their duty, and we're to be thanked for it, but we're not doing any great thing that's never been done before, and although we deserve, the people in the armed forces deserve respect and that sort of thing, they're doing what the generations before them have done. And they wouldn't be where they are now if generations before us had not made sacrifices to give us what we've got at the present time. And it's our job, the only way we can be respectful of those people is to give to our future generations, try to give them as good as we've got from our past generation. So I think it's our responsibility more than giving us so much credit.
So one last question.
We're not angels either.
No, nobody is. One last question. Are you thankful that you served in the military? Are you grateful? Do you feel like that helped you out in your career after the military? What kind of lessons did your service teach you?
Well, I think every generation has something that's very dominant in their life that affects them for the rest of their life. And my generation, and each generation, and my own personal thinking is about 25 years long, and when they're in control, had two big things. The first one was the Depression, and the second was World War II. And of course they affect you, and you think in terms of those things for the rest of your life. They played a part in it. But that's just for your generation. And other generations had the same thing happen, so it's no different. It's just a repetition. So many things make a full circle. Right now we're having trouble in Wilmington, people getting drunk in the bars and getting out on the street and fighting with each other. Well, it's made a full circle. Back in the before Prohibition, that was what was happening. Everybody was getting drunk and doing just what they're doing now, going out and fighting on the street. And so they passed an amendment that you couldn't sell alcohol. But now we've forgotten all those days, and so now we're serving alcohol to everybody, and we're full circle now. We had 2 or 3 people killed recently here in Wilmington as a result of that. So things happen over and over again. We don't completely learn from the lessons that have happened before us. So that's done. My philosophy is a very practical philosophy. It has, at the height of it is a code of ethics, and my advice to young doctors, we're in a training program here. I don't know whether you know that or not, but we've got training in surgery, and I was involved with the training of young men here at the hospital, and they ask a lot of questions because it's all new to them. And my overall advice to them is you take good care of your patient, which is your job, and everything else will work out. So that's my general philosophy.
Yeah, this you going back to the world and talking about full circle. I mean, it's such a good world, but yet it's such a cruel world at the same time. And we live in such a fallen world. But as you see so much bad stuff on the news, like that young man that 40 years old that was beheaded by those ISIS people last week. I mean, he died for no reason. He was a journalist over there. He wasn't even over there fighting, and I see that, and you know, that makes me very sad. And I'm like, you know, why is this world so cruel? You know, at certain points, but for you to live 94, I hope I can live half your age. Like, I hope. I think you like you said, you have lived you've lived a good life, and you're very blessed to have lived, you know, as long as you have, and you've seen a lot, and
the longevity is getting longer.
yeah.
And at one time, females had a 7-year advantage of males. But the female now is taking on so many of the habits of the males that the difference has dropped down now to about 5 years. So if they keep on and get just like us, they're not going to live any longer than we do. But the type of living in the past made them, and they get help from nature too, because nature has things worked out giving very practical answers. They want the female to live to raise the children and that sort of thing. So it's Mother Nature's activity is just remarkable, as we mentioned a while ago, the human body, how it works.
I know Father Time and Mother Nature are undefeated, aren't they? They haven't lost yet. One last thing, I mean, obviously being a Christian and stuff, so you believe in Jesus, and you believe that he was resurrected and he died?
Well, I don't want to get into the details of that, because you can evaluate Jesus in many different ways.
Yeah.
My thing that I like about Jesus was his philosophy, the teachings that he did. I have some trouble with some of the other parts of it, but getting back to what we said a while ago, he was involved primarily and mostly with relationships, and that's the important thing in the world at the present time. We can have relationships with individuals. We also got relationships between two countries, and so many of us countries have not learned that you have to respect other people's attitudes. But some people carry their beliefs way too far, such as all the people that are being killed now because of Islam and that sort of thing. They're terrorists, they're not religious people.
No, they are.
They have to be treated different.
Yeah. Is there anything else you can think of that you want to talk about that stands out in
I
your
think
life?
I bored you long enough.